So I want you to think about the biggest know-it-all in your office.
Oh, yeah, we all have one.
Right. You know the exact person, the one who, like, corners you in the break room or completely hijacks a meeting just to explain things in this excruciating, super patronizing detail.
Yeah, the classic mansplainer or just chronic over-explainer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what if I told you that their behavior actually has absolutely nothing to do with ego?
Which is wild to think about.
Right. Like, what if it's actually just this desperate physiological panic attack happening inside their own body?
It completely shatters the stereotype, doesn't it? Because we tend to view that kind of relentless over-explaining as a power play.
Well, 100%. Like they're trying to dominate the room.
Exactly. But when we actually look at the structural mechanics of what's happening, the psychology behind it, we find something far more fragile and, frankly, a lot more common.
Yeah. And that is exactly the mission for today's deep dive. We are dismantling the myth of the over-explainer. Because I think, if we're being completely honest with ourselves, you, me, and literally everyone listening has been that person at some point.
Oh, absolutely. I know I have.
Right. So picture this. Have you ever found yourself in the middle of explaining a concept, maybe to a colleague or partner or whatever, and right in the middle of your sentence, you feel the connection slipping away?
Oh, that feeling is the worst.
It really is. You can almost feel the barometric pressure in the room changing. You started out just trying to make something crystal clear, but suddenly the vibe shifts. You look at their face, and it feels like you're practically forcing knowledge down their throat.
Yeah, and the worst part is the more you sense that disconnect, the faster you talk.
Yes, you try to bridge this expanding gap with even more words.
It's an incredibly uncomfortable human experience because you are watching yourself do it in real time. You can hear your own voice speeding up, you can see their eyes glazing over, but you feel completely powerless to hit the brakes.
Yeah. You're trapped in the momentum of your own explanation.
Exactly. And it puts you in this terrible double bind, right? Because on one hand, if you keep talking and over-explain, it starts to feel like, knowledge violence.
Knowledge violence, yeah. That term.
Yeah, you're just pummeling them with details until they submit. But then on the other hand, if you notice they're confused and you force yourself to just, stop and stay quiet.
You're just sitting there watching them struggle.
Right. The silence feels so heavy and you feel incredibly guilty. So either way, whether you speak or stay silent, you walk away feeling like the bad guy.
It's a lose-lose scenario. And it plays out in boardrooms and living rooms literally every single day. And the distress it causes is profound, really, because it strikes at the very heart of how we attempt to connect with other human beings.
Yeah, it really does.
So our goal today is to deconstruct this whole dynamic. We're going to expose the hidden gap between what we think we're communicating and what is actually being received. Okay, let's unpack this. Because to get to the bottom of this, we first have to dismantle that giant misconception I mentioned at the top.
Right, the ego thing.
Exactly. We have to kill the myth of the ego-driven know-it-all.
Right. Because when we encounter someone who over-explains, our cultural shorthand is incredibly uncharitable.
Oh, for sure. We just think they're annoying.
Exactly. We label them a pedant or someone who just loves the sound of their own voice. We assume the intention is dominance. We assume their internal monologue is, I'm going to demonstrate how much smarter I am than you.
Which is such a harsh assumption when you think about it.
It is, because when we analyze the psychology behind chronic over-explaining, we find that the starting point is almost never dominance. The starting point is actually, I don't want you to be troubled.
Wow. I just found that realization so striking when we were looking at the sources. It actually comes from a place of deep, almost overwhelming concern.
Yes. What we're really looking at in the vast majority of these cases is a hyper-empathetic mindset.
Empathy? Wait, really?
Yeah, empathy. People who fall into this trap are often individuals who think deeply and feel deeply, and they possess this highly tuned sensitivity to the emotional states of others.
Okay.
So when they imagine another person struggling to grasp a concept, it isn't just an intellectual observation for them.
What is it then? Are they just, really conflict avoidant?
It goes deeper than avoiding conflict, actually. It's a biological response.
A biological response, in their body.
Literally in their body. When a highly perceptive, empathetic person sees someone else confused, their brain's threat detection system, the amygdala, often flares up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, thanks to their mirror neuron system, they aren't just registering the other person's confusion. Their own nervous system is literally simulating the distress of being lost. They experience a literal physiological tightness in their chest.
That is wild. So the other person's potential cognitive struggle basically registers as an active distress signal in the speaker's own body.
Precisely.
So the over-explaining is actually a rescue mission.
Exactly. It's a rescue mission. But, and this is the key, it is a deeply flawed, entirely projection-based rescue mission.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, the speaker perceives a potential hardship for the listener. The hardship of not knowing, the vulnerability of being confused, the discomfort of feeling lost. And so they launch a preemptive strike of words to save the listener from that discomfort.
Oh, I see. It's almost like being a human autocorrect.
A human autocorrect, yes.
Or maybe a pop-up blocker.
Yeah?
You know, you're scanning the horizon of the conversation, you see a problem coming, like a moment of confusion, and you jump in to fix it before the person even asked for help. Or frankly, before they even realized they were having a problem.
Yes, a human pop-up blocker. That's a great analogy. But imagine if the pop-up blocker was so aggressive that it didn't just stop the ad, it accidentally deleted the actual website you were trying to read.
Oh man, yeah.
Because that is exactly what over-explaining does to the listener's thought process. You're trying to block the discomfort before it renders on their screen, but in doing so, you essentially crash their browser. That makes so much sense.
And to understand why this fails so spectacularly, we have to look at the triggers. Because perceptive people possess this incredibly sharp, almost hypervigilant emotional radar. They are picking up on micro-expressions that others might miss completely.
Right, these tiny fleeting moments, like seeing the trying to understand face.
Yes, the furrowed brow.
The slightly shifting eyes. Or, oh, my absolute favorite, because I have seen it 1,000 times, the moment when someone's mouth opens slightly, as if they're about to ask a clarifying question, and then they slowly close it without saying anything.
Yes, those micro-expressions are the tripwires.
Tripwires.
Yeah, a highly empathetic person registers that slightly open mouth, that flicker of hesitation, and their internal alarm bells just start blaring. Their anxiety sensor goes into overdrive.
So they're thinking, oh no, they are lost.
Exactly, they're struggling. And worse, I am causing them pain by not being clear enough.
Wow. And this brings us to what I think is one of the most profound insights we uncovered in the research. The tragic misinterpretation of silence. Oh, the silence. The silence is the crucible where this entire dynamic just falls apart.
Okay, let's talk about the silence.
Let's think about this logically. When there is a pause in a complex conversation, what is actually happening physiologically and neurologically in the listener?
I mean, they're just thinking, right?
Exactly. In the vast majority of cases, silence is simply the sound of cognitive processing.
So they're doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing.
Right. The listener's brain is working. They are taking the new data you just gave them, categorizing it, running it against their existing mental models, and formulating a coherent response. Silence means the machinery is operating exactly as it should.
But to the human pop-up blocker, to the hyper-empathetic over-explainer who is already in a state of nervous system arousal, that silence does not feel like productive processing.
Not at all.
To them, the silence feels like an agonizing void. It feels like a black hole where the other person is actively being hurt by their own confusion.
And this is where the flawed rescue mission kicks into high gear. Because the empathetic speaker perceives the silence as a void of suffering, filling that silence feels like an act of basic human courtesy.
Like saving them?
Right. It feels like throwing a life preserver to a drowning person. But because the speaker is panicking, they don't just throw one life preserver.
No, they throw the life preserver, then they throw a raft.
Then they throw the flare gun, and then they start throwing the deck chairs.
They just empty the entire cargo hold.
Exactly. They just keep throwing words. And ironically, that basic courtesy morphs into this relentless barrage of information.
And I know you and I can both relate to being on both sides of this equation. Like, I have definitely been the one explaining, thinking, I'm helping, I'm giving you all the necessary context, I'm painting the full picture so you don't have to strain your brain.
Oh, we all have.
But I've also been the listener, sitting there completely paralyzed, thinking, please, I am begging you to stop talking so my brain can actually digest the very first thing you said 3 minutes ago.
Which perfectly illustrates why the recipient ends up feeling so alienated and frustrated. The listener was just thinking, they were doing the work. But by rushing in to fill the silence, the speaker interrupts that delicate cognitive process.
They crash the browser.
Exactly. The listener has to drop the mental model they were building just to catch the new barrage of words. And worse, the speaker's internal anxiety almost always bleeds into their tone.
Oh, totally. They start speaking faster.
Their pitch might go up, they might lean in too closely. This makes the listener feel rushed, overwhelmed, or even patronized, which is the exact opposite of the speaker's intent.
Because the speaker wanted to prevent the listener from feeling troubled.
Right, but the barrage of words actually creates the trouble.
Wait, hold on. Let me push back on that slightly.
Sure.
If the intention is genuinely so pure, if it is truly born of empathy and a desire to prevent the other person from feeling the discomfort of confusion, why does it trigger such a negative reaction? I mean, empathy is supposed to build connection, right? If I'm trying to save you, why do you end up resenting me? Who are we actually trying to save in that moment?
That is the pivotal question, honestly, and it's where the psychology gets a bit messy.
Messy how?
Well, if over-explaining is a rescue mission, who is the actual victim? The answer is twofold, and it contains a pretty fascinating contradiction. First, we have to look at a very specific, almost paradoxical form of anxiety.
Okay.
It's the fear of external judgment on behalf of the other person.
Ah, yes. The fear that the other person will be seen as ignorant by outside observers.
Exactly.
Because it's incredibly layered, almost recursive anxiety where you are over-explaining to protect their dignity in the eyes of everyone else.
Yes. Let's ground this in a real-world scenario. Imagine you're in a high-stakes Zoom meeting with, 15 people, including leadership. You're explaining a new workflow, you look at a colleague's video square, and you see that micro-expression of confusion.
Furrowed brow.
Right. The hyper-empathetic over-explainer doesn't just worry that the colleague is momentarily lost. Their brain instantly catapults to the worst-case scenario.
Which is what?
They fear that everyone else in the room will notice the colleague is confused. They fear the colleague will be permanently branded as the person who doesn't get it, or, the weak link on the team.
Wow. So the speaker panics and preemptively dumps a mountain of simplified, granular information on them, thinking, I will explain this so thoroughly from the ground up that no one on this call could possibly think you are out of the loop.
Right.
I'm throwing myself on the grenade to shield your professional reputation.
Yes. But let's unpack the profound irony of that action. By trying to protect the listener from looking like they don't get it to the rest of the room, what does the speaker actually have to do?
Well, they have to single them out.
Exactly. They have to stop the natural flow of the meeting, zero in on that specific person, and over-explain the concept to them like they're a novice.
Oh, no.
So what is the actual message being received by the listener and everyone else in that moment?
Oh, I see it.
The message received is loud and clear. The speaker thinks, I am too slow to understand this.
Oh, wow. Right. By trying to hide their supposed ignorance from the group, you are shining a giant, blinding spotlight right on it.
Yep.
You're publicly confirming the exact deficit you were trying to hide.
Precisely. It is a classic misfiring of good intentions. The speaker creates the exact dynamic they were desperately trying to avoid.
That's so tragic.
It really is. The listener feels targeted, humiliated, patronized, and exposed. And the speaker, who genuinely thought they were being kind and protective, senses the listener's sudden resentment.
And then the speaker feels totally misunderstood.
Completely. They feel punished for their good deed. They think, why are you mad at me? I was trying to help you.
Man, here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because as much as we can empathize with that misguided reverse empathy, the psychological analysis doesn't let the speaker off the hook entirely.
Yo, it doesn't.
It points out that all this frantic explaining, this desperate need to make sure the information lands perfectly, is actually tied to the speaker's own internal void.
This is the absolute crux of the issue. The hyper-empathy is a real factor, yes, but it is deeply entangled with the speaker's own fundamental psychological needs. The urge to over-explain is ultimately a defense mechanism.
And what we found in the research is that this relentless drive to explain is rooted in a desperate, almost primal need to be accepted.
Let's dissect the psychological equation at play here, because it operates entirely on a subconscious level, but it dictates the speaker's behavior with an iron grip.
Okay, what's the equation?
The equation is this: being perfectly understood equals being accepted, and being accepted equals feeling safe.
Being perfectly understood equals being accepted, which equals feeling safe. That is massive.
It really is.
That completely reframes the entire act of talking.
It is the architectural blueprint of the over-explainer's anxiety. For someone operating with this psychological framework, communication is not just about transferring data.
Right.
It's not just about giving you the quarterly numbers or explaining how the coffee machine works. Every single interaction is a high-stakes test of their own emotional security.
Wow.
When they explain something and feel that the other person completely grasps it, when they see the nod, the light bulb moment, they experience a profound rush of relief.
Because their nervous system downregulates.
Exactly. They feel validated. They feel that their mind, their perspective, and ultimately their very existence has been accepted by the other person. They are safe.
And on the flip side, if they see that blank stare or that slightly open mouth, it isn't just a failure of pedagogy. It doesn't just mean, oh, I need to use a different slide deck.
No.
It feels like a personal rejection. It feels like you don't understand my words, therefore you don't understand me, therefore I am alone, disconnected, and fundamentally unsafe.
Exactly. And this explains the profound exhaustion that accompanies this habit. People who over-explain are often completely drained, just chronically fatigued by their social interactions.
And it's crucial to point out that this fatigue isn't because the listener is unintelligent, nor is it because the speaker lacks vocabulary.
Right. It's a structural flaw in how they are trying to live and navigate the world.
A catastrophic structural flaw, really.
Absolutely. The speaker is relying on the perfect transmission of information to regulate their own emotional safety.
Which is impossible.
It is. They are using an incredibly fragile, highly volatile medium human language and the subjective, unpredictable comprehension of another person's brain as the anchor for their own psychological well-being.
I was trying to think of a way to visualize this earlier. It's almost like trying to drive a car, but instead of just turning the key and trusting the engine to run on its own, you feel the need to pop the hood, sit on the engine block, and manually strike a match to ignite every single spark plug yourself.
Oh, wow.
Like thousands of times a minute, just to keep the car moving forward. You are micromanaging the transmission of energy because you don't trust the vehicle.
That is a much better analogy than the pocket blocker, actually. You are manually firing the spark plugs of communication.
Exactly.
If your internal sense of safety requires that every single person you talk to must perfectly understand your complex thoughts with zero ambiguity, zero hesitation, and zero silence,
You are going to be working overtime all the time.
your brain will never rest.
It's a staggering realization because it reframes the whole problem. The over-explaining isn't just an annoying conversational quirk. It is a symptom of trying to outsource your emotional regulation to someone else's reading comprehension.
And because language is inherently imperfect and human minds are vastly different in their architecture and experience, that outsourcing will fail continuously.
It is guaranteed to fail.
Guaranteed. Hence, the relentless urge to add just one more sentence, one more metaphor, one more clarifying point. You are desperately trying to engineer a feeling of safety out of words.
Okay, so if piling on words is a disaster, if trying to manually fire the spark plugs just exhausts everyone and runs out the engine, why do the people who are considered the wisest communicators in history seem to barely talk at all?
This brings us to a fascinating paradox.
Because it's such a stark contrast.
It really is. When we look at individuals who possess immense moral weight, highly experienced elders, renowned philosophers, figures who have navigated the deepest complexities of the human condition, we notice something interesting.
What's that?
They often boil the absolute most complex human dilemmas down to singular, incredibly abstract concepts, the most notable being the word love.
Right. Love conquers all. Just love one another. The answer is love.
Yes.
And I have to be honest, I want to press you hard on this
Go for it.
because I need you to convince me that this isn't just a lazy cop-out for people who don't want to deal with the details.
It definitely sounds like one.
It does. Because if I am struggling with something immensely complex, let's say it's a brutal, convoluted Chapter 11 bankruptcy that is going to put 50 people out of work, or maybe a deeply nuanced, agonizing crisis in a marriage involving financial betrayal and a decade of suppressed resentment.
Really heavy, granular stuff.
Exactly. And some guru or wise elder looks at me calmly and says, just use love.
You're going to lose your mind.
I am going to lose my mind. It feels entirely dismissive. It feels like they aren't even engaging with the reality of your suffering.
It feels worse than dismissive, really.
It does. To a highly analytical person, to someone who has spent their life studying the nuances, reading the financial reports, going to couples therapy, doing the spreadsheets, it sounds utterly empty.
It sounds like a bumper sticker.
Yes. It feels like they're giving a first-grade answer to a graduate-level catastrophe. Like, how does love solve the mechanics of a liquidated asset? It doesn't.
Your frustration is completely valid.
Yeah.
And it is exactly the reaction a highly analytical, granular thinker is expected to have when confronted with that kind of abstraction.
Right, because it feels like an insult to your intellect.
It does. But We have to analyze why these figures speak this way. When someone of profound lived experience uses a word like love, they are not being shallow.
Okay.
They are not skipping the hard steps, and they are certainly not stupid. They're actually so deep that granular explanations are no longer necessary or even possible for them to articulate.
I'm really struggling to see how saying one word is deeper than a 2-hour nuanced explanation of the mechanics of a problem.
It comes down to the gap of experience.
The gap of experience.
Yes. The disconnect here isn't about intelligence or analytical capability. It is strictly about the accumulation of lived experience.
Okay, walk me through that.
Think of it this way. When someone who has spent a lifetime in the trenches, someone who has witnessed profound suffering, navigated impossible moral ambiguities, and actually put in the grueling, painful work of living for decades, when they say the word love, that word is essentially a zip file.
A zip file. Okay, explain that.
It is a massively compressed data file. Inside that single word are decades of trial, error, agony, betrayal, forgiveness, and transcendence.
Oh, I see.
They have already analyzed the spreadsheet. They have already navigated the marital betrayal. They have done all the granular, exhausting work you are currently drowning in.
Right.
And having come out the other side, having survived the complexity, they have realized that all those complex mechanics ultimately distill down to a single, powerful orienting principle. They have traversed the complexity and arrived at a profound simplicity on the other side.
Wow. So when they say love conquers all, they aren't just reciting a cliche. The phrase lands perfectly for them because their own life is the proof of the concept.
Exactly.
The word is built on a massive subterranean foundation of experiential evidence.
Yes. For them, the zip file opens and all the context is there. But here is the tragedy of communication and where it connects directly back to our over-explainer. To someone without that experiential foundation, to the person still trying to figure out the bankruptcy spreadsheet or survive the initial shock of the betrayal, the word love is an encrypted file.
An encrypted file.
You don't have the software to open it. It has nothing to stand on. It is a roof with no walls.
Which means communication has hard, unavoidable limits. Words, even identical words, are received completely differently depending on the foundation they land on.
That is the core theme we are synthesizing here. This is the structural gap we talked about at the very beginning.
Right.
Whether you are an anxious professional over-explaining a concept in a meeting, or a world-renowned philosopher simply saying the word love, the fundamental issue is identical. Words fail when the speaker and the listener are standing on different levels of depth and experience.
So the foundation matters more than the vocabulary.
Always. You can use 100 incredibly precise words to explain a spreadsheet, or you can use one abstract word to explain a life philosophy. But if the listener does not have the experiential soil to absorb the seed you are planting, it will not grow.
And the over-explainer tries to compensate for the listener's lack of experiential foundation by burying them in vocabulary.
Exactly. They try to force the soil to be ready by just dumping more and more water on it.
Which just causes a flood and washes everything away.
Precisely. The philosopher, on the other hand, simply drops the seed of a single word and accepts that it might not grow until the listener's soil is ready.
They accept the limitations.
They accept the limitations of language. They accept the terrifying truth that some things simply must be lived before they can be understood.
Okay, so what does this all mean for you, the listener, tomorrow morning at the office, or on your next stressful Zoom call, or sitting across the dinner table from your partner?
The practical application.
Right. Because we've clearly identified the trap. We know that over-explaining is an exhausting, flawed attempt to secure our own emotional safety.
We do.
We know that words are bound to fail when experience levels don't match. We know we can't just forcefully download our understanding into someone else's brain. So how do we live with this?
Yeah.
How do we navigate this without either completely shutting down, becoming a cynic, or burning ourselves out trying to be the human pop-up blocker?
Well, the good news is we don't have to choose between cynical silence and frantic over-explaining. There is a middle path.
Okay, I'm all ears.
But it requires two major shifts in how we operate. The first is a pragmatic shift in our expectations, and the second is a deeply internal shift regarding our own anxiety.
Let's start with the pragmatic shift, the idea of dropping the expectation of perfect transmission.
Yes, you need to adopt a very specific premise before you even open your mouth to explain something complex. It needs to become your mantra.
What is it?
The premise is this. It is natural that this might not translate.
It is natural that this might not translate.
Yes.
I'll be honest, my inner over-explainer absolutely hates that.
Oh, I'm sure it does.
That sounds like giving up before you even start the race.
It sounds like giving up to the anxious mind, yes. Because the anxious mind wants total control, but it is not giving up. It is the establishment of a healthy, realistic boundary.
Okay.
Think back to the equation we discussed earlier. Being perfectly understood equals feeling safe. As long as you hold on to that expectation, every single conversation is a life or death struggle for your nervous system.
Right.
By actively assuming that perfect transmission is highly unlikely, because of those gaps in experience we just discussed, you protect your own energy.
So instead of perfect understanding being the baseline requirement for the conversation to be considered a success, any understanding that is achieved becomes a bonus.
Exactly. It completely lowers the stakes. When you accept that they might not get it right away and that their lack of understanding is a natural consequence of having different lived experiences rather than a personal failure on your part.
Or a deficit on theirs.
Right. You stop pushing so hard. You offer the information. You lay it on the table. You don't force feed it to them.
Yeah.
If they catch 30% of it, you view that as a win rather than agonizing over the 70% they missed.
That makes a lot of sense conceptually. It takes the pressure off the listener, too, which ironically probably makes them much more open to actually hearing you because they don't feel like they are being attacked with information.
Absolutely.
But what about the internal panic? Because logically, knowing I shouldn't over-explain is one thing. But when I'm in that Zoom meeting and I see that micro-expression of confusion on my boss's face, my chest is still going to tighten.
Oh, the amygdala is still going to fire.
The alarm bells will ring.
Yeah.
How do we address that visceral internal shift?
This is where we have to engage in real-time self-awareness. It is the hardest part of the process, but it is the only way out of the loop.
Okay.
When you are in that moment and you feel that physiological urge to launch into an over-explanation, you have to insert a pause.
Yeah.
Literal, physical pause.
In dreaded silence. We're back to the silence.
Yes, you must inhabit the silence. But instead of focusing outward on fixing the listener's confusion, you have to turn your focus inward. You must acknowledge and name your own internal state.
Name it.
Let's role play this. You are on the call. You present the slide. Your boss furrows her brow. You feel your heart rate spike to 110.
Yeah.
Instead of jumping in to say, let me explain that another way, you take a breath and you say to yourself internally, I am feeling anxious right now. I am feeling the desperate need to be validated in this moment.
Just calling it out to yourself. Literally narrating your own panic.
Yes. The act of naming the feeling, asking yourself in that exact moment, what is actually scary right now? What is the actual threat?
Yeah.
Creates cognitive distance.
Cognitive distance. Meaning you aren't just swept away by the river of panic. You are standing on the riverbank observing it.
Beautifully put. When you are unconsciously driven by anxiety, you are the anxiety. Your entire reality is colored by it. But when you pause and name it, you become the observer of the anxiety.
It's a huge shift.
It is. You create a tiny gap between the stimulus, their confused face, and your habitual response, the barrage of words. In that tiny gap lies your freedom. You realize, wait, I am feeling unsafe because they look confused. But their confusion is not actually a threat to my existence. The threat is my own feeling of isolation.
Right.
By naming it, you stop relying on the other person's nodding head to soothe your own internal panic. You soothe it yourself through self-acknowledgement.
Yeah, I am feeling the need to be accepted right now. That is incredibly vulnerable, even just to admit to yourself in the privacy of your own mind.
It takes practice.
But I can see how it immediately short-circuits the need to control the other person's brain. You realize the problem isn't their lack of understanding. The problem is your own sudden drop in emotional security.
And once you take responsibility for your own emotional security, the frantic, gripping need to over-explain basically evaporates.
Because you aren't trying to save yourself through them anymore.
Exactly. You can still clarify a point, certainly. If they ask a question, you answer it. But the desperate, grasping energy is gone. You are communicating from a place of grounded reality rather than a place of panic.
I love how this all ties together, especially the validation aspect. Because after dissecting all this anxiety, all these flawed rescue missions, and the arrogance of thinking we can manually fire the spark plugs of communication, it's easy to feel bad about ourselves.
Oh, no, absolutely.
But the reality is that having this depth, the fact that you feel things so intensely, the fact that you can read a room hyper-accurately, that you possess this intense, almost painful desire to protect people from confusion, this is not a flaw.
That is a crucial, crucial distinction. The sensitivity itself is not the enemy. The empathy is a gift.
Right. This depth is genuine. It is real. You aren't crazy for seeing all the nuances and wanting to share them. The trick isn't to kill your depth or to numb yourself and become a cold, callous person who stops caring if people understand things.
No, not at all.
The trick is simply learning who has the capacity to receive that depth in any given moment. It's about discerning where your depth can take root and where it will just wash away the topsoil.
It is entirely about the stewardship of your own energy and your own profound capacity for empathy. You learn to offer your depth where there is a foundation to support it, where the listener has the lived experience to open the zip file.
Yeah.
And you learn to offer grace, brevity, and simplicity where there is not.
So we have gone on quite a journey today.
We really have.
We started with the sheer visceral awkwardness of being a human pop-up blocker, desperately trying to fix someone's confusion before they even ask.
Yep.
We navigated the exhausting, hidden quest for emotional safety, realizing that we often use over-explaining as a flawed shield against our own fear of rejection. We explored the paradox of why the profound simplicity of a word like love can infuriate us when we don't yet have the lived experience to understand its weight.
The encrypted file.
Right. And finally, we looked at how to protect our own beautiful, complicated depth by dropping the demand for perfect understanding, creating cognitive distance, and naming our anxieties in real time.
It requires a massive paradigm shift in how we view the very purpose of communication. We have to stop seeing it as a mechanism for total emotional synchronization and start seeing it as an exchange between two inherently different worlds.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I know you always have one last thing to leave us chewing on, something to take with us into our week. What is the final takeaway here?
I want to circle back to the very beginning, to that incredibly uncomfortable space we discussed. The silence.
The silence.
We've established that silence is often just the sound of someone's mind working, and that our own deep-seated biological fear of that silence is what drives us to over-explain and exhaust ourselves. But I want you to think about this as you go into your next conversation.
Okay.
If you can train yourself to simply sit in that silence next time it happens, to actively hold that space without rushing in to fix it, without dumping words into the void to soothe your own anxiety, you might discover something profound. You aren't just giving the other person the necessary gift of time to think. You might actually be giving yourself the ultimate proof that you are safe and that you are accepted exactly as you are without having to say another word.
That is exactly what I need to remember the next time I feel the physical urge to start a sentence with, well, actually, let me just add, thank you so much for exploring this with me.
It was a pleasure.
And to you, the listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time, hopefully with a little more comfort in the quiet moments.